I could no longer count to 10. I'm a former casino dealer. Costa, that means you're real fast at basic math. I could no longer count to 10. And I still struggle with that. I mean, like, cannabis didn't cure me, but it gave me a quality of life for the first time.
Hey, y'all, it's Kosta. Today, I'm here with my guest, Nikki Lawley, medical cannabis advocate, educator, and founder of Nikki and the Plant. Today, we're talking about aging, longevity, and medical cannabis. So, Nikki, can you tell us a little bit about your journey with cannabis and also how you founded Nikki and the Plant?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me on the show. I'm pretty excited to be here. The more mainstream we get with the stories, the more powerful it's going to get for all of us as far as an advocacy and a awareness perspective, because the stigma surrounding cannabis is so great. My name is Nikki Lawley. I live in Buffalo, New York. And about 6 years ago, I was just doing my job like any other day, and I suffered a traumatic brain injury. A child became combative for a vaccine, and he hit me in the forehead. I bounced off a wall and back into his head. Fluke accident, fluke experience, never expected to still have symptoms from that day. But 10, 11, 16, my day forever changed. And I could no longer do the things that we all take for granted. I had to learn what being a patient was like after being a long-term nurse and a healthcare provider. I went from being the respected medical professional to now being a patient in the New York State workers' compensation system, which is anything but a patient-friendly system. And they're just there to get you off workers' compensation, whether you're ready to go or not. And the care is definitely different than what I was used to being a nurse. It just was, you're a number, that's it. And I was never a cannabis fan as far as one that would use it for medicine, because in nursing school, we weren't taught about plant medicine. We weren't taught that we have a whole system in our body called the endocannabinoid system. You would have told me that 6 years ago, which people tried. I laughed at them. I said, I don't know what you're smoking, but I went to nursing school and that is not in our anatomy books. And when you think about that for just 1 second, we really do have a system in our body that is just as important as our respiratory system, as our neurological system. This system actually has receptors throughout our body, especially in the brain, that are searching for cannabinoids. They're searching, we make our own, but also exercise can induce them. There's like all kinds of crazy stuff that I had no idea about being a nurse, right? So I just did what I was told. I took all these different pills. I was on 16 at one time, and I was ready to take my life. I was in Las Vegas vacationing because my husband, in desperate effort to get me out of my funk from this sudden change of my life in every aspect, we went to Las Vegas and I was ready to take my life. And a billboard came driving by down the Las Vegas Strip saying, "Get your medical marijuana card in Nevada today." I laughed at that. I said, "Oh, great idea, Nikki. Just like the war on drugs, go ahead and fry your brain." We all saw Nancy Reagan and her whole high horse about your brain on drugs with the frying egg in the pan. And that's kind of what I related to when I saw it. Then the billboard came by a second time. And I'm like, well, this is really messing up my plans. So my husband came in about that time and said, well, let's do it. You've used pot before and you've smiled and laughed. Let's try that. You've destroyed our vacation. So let's see if we can salvage something. I mean, I was in a really, really, really dark place, Costa. So, I mean, in defense of him, he wasn't being insensitive, but I mean, I really was ruining our.
Did you tell him this? Like, did you tell him on your vacation that you were going to end your life?
Realize what I was doing when he left the room, but later, as he's heard the story now 400 times, now he knows. But at the time, I didn't share, hey, I'm going to off myself in the hotel. I mean,
and so
I didn't plan it.
Was this your and his kind of last ditch effort?
I would say yes. I mean, I was although I was only 4 months into my injury at that point, I was hopeless. I mean, I
Yeah.
felt so sick all the time. All I thought about was killing myself. All I thought about was what a burden I am to my family and how horrible it is. And, I went from being the caretaker to being taken care of,
Yeah.
and that's not something I say lightly because it really was a horrible flip of the switch. So I end up going to the dispensary for the first time, getting my medical card, and what a whole production that was. I mean, it was just such a big deal for me to leave the hotel room. So, I mean, it was just a production of everything. Everything seemed like such a big chore. And I took way too many gummies. I went to the dispensary and the kid just was throwing different stuff at me. Like, I really don't know what to give you, but here, try this, try that, try the other thing. But he never cautioned me, hey, make sure you only take one or two of those. I ate the whole bag.
Oh my
They
gosh.
tasted good. And I mean, I ate several bags that day. And
wow.
I slept, though, for the first time, Costa. I slept for like 18 hours straight. And since I was so early in the recovery of my injury, I mean, in 4 months, I hadn't slept more than 2 hours. And that was being souped up on Xanax. So when I finally woke up and my husband's like, hey, you've still got some more of this pot. You've got to eat it and finish it because we can't take it home on the airplane. And I'm like, okay, all right, yeah, but I don't feel like smoking. And I had 2 joints left. And I felt so hungover from that whole massive amounts of edibles
Yeah, I
that
can't even imagine.
like trying to smoke a cigarette, smoke a joint was like
Yeah.
really not sounding real appealing. But I
Right.
tell you what, that got me out of the room. That joint got me out of the room that day, and I was able to eat for the first time in that vacation. I was able to be around people and slot machines and noise for the first time in 4 days. And I was like, could it be the pot? Like, it just seemed absolutely ridiculous. So then I come home from vacation. I go and share with my workers' compensation doctors this great thing about, discovering medical cannabis. And I'm a medical marijuana patient. And I mean, go medical marijuana for the first time, right? And they all told me it wasn't medicinal. There's no way if you smoked cannabis that you were getting any medicinal benefits. If you had high THC, there's no medicine in that. And these were several doctors. So now it's written in my file that I'm a drug seeker and I'm using illicit substances. You can't imagine being a healthcare provider and having those words in your chart.
Right.
Like not a cool badge of honor.
No, absolutely.
Like, this is not good. And, at this point, I'm still hoping to go back to work. But now I've got a drug seeker as one of my diagnoses. I mean, it was horrible. So I became hopeless again, and I got on more pharmaceuticals. And it got so bad to the point I had to write a letter to my therapist guaranteeing I wouldn't take my life, that I was in such a dark place. Mm-hmm. I had friends in Canada. I live in Buffalo, New York. Canada is literally almost crossing the street, only going into another country. It's super close to where I live. And I had friends because I was a former casino dealer as well as pediatric nurse. And so all my friends from Canada came to the States to gamble. Mm-hmm. And then what would happen is I became friends with them, long-term friends. So they saw my post on social media where I was pretty much like, I am just done. If this is as good as life gets, I'm just done. Mm-hmm. So one of them reached out with a private message and said, hey, we've got medical pot here. Why don't you come over here and try some pot? I mean, if you're in that bad a shape, if it worked in Vegas, why wouldn't it work in Canada? Mm-hmm. There began my journey with plant medicine. There began my true quest for information, knowledge, and doing anything I could to relieve these horrific symptoms of chronic pain of my head and neck, balance issues, cognitive function. I could not do the most simple of math problems. I could no longer count to 10. I'm a former casino dealer. Kosta, that means you're real fast at basic math. I could no longer count to 10.
Yeah.
And I still struggle with that. I mean, like, cannabis didn't cure me, but it gave me a quality of life for the first time. So then I had anxiety and depression. Cannabis helps with my anxiety and depression. It helps with agitation. Like, I get really, excuse the term, pissy, for lack of a better term. I have a very short fuse. So I can get really snappy, turtle-like,
but you didn't have that short fuse prior to the TBI?
Never.
Okay. So these are all, so the symptoms that you're describing that cannabis is helping with are symptoms that are directly correlated to the TBI that you had. Correct. It wasn't just like, and it wasn't things that you experienced prior to it.
No.
Fascinating.
I had one time where I became depressed, and that was when my son went to jail.
Okay.
But other than that, my entire life, I was not a depressy kind of person. I was very much fun-loving, energetic. No task was too big.
And we're going to get into the meat of this episode, which is talking about how cannabis can help with some of the chronic illnesses for seniors on a large scale, but then also some of the stigmas and perceptions and things like that. But before we do that, I want to ask one more thing. Did you end up going back to work in the care world?
No.
Okay.
I am no longer practicing. I do receive long-term disability.
Sure.
But I'm trying to find a job now, but I almost need a job that really recognizes my different abilities, not my disabilities. So I'm really good at some things now, but there's other things that I'll never be good at, like tech.
Well, so what did it make you good at? Since you've had this journey, like what senses or what skills have been heightened from it?
It's crazy to tell you this, but everything is heightened, meaning my awareness of people around me and my empathy is totally different. I can read a room instead of being oblivious to what was happening. I am more in tune with my body than I ever have been. And I use cannabis with intention, meaning if I know I got a headache that's a 9, I know a certain strain that's going to help with that headache, but it might make me tired. So that would be an undesired effect. But at the same time, what's worse, being tired or the headache? So one has to be educated in knowledge of what works and why. Yeah. So that's one thing. I was absolutely terrified of public speaking or standing on a stage or sharing my story. Like, I was like, who would care about that? Well, that's a big difference now.
Right. Yeah, I can tell. I can tell I have
like 87,000 followers, like from total organic stuff. Like I just shared, I suck at tech. Well, I really do. And so anything that's out there is based on me. But if you Google me, there's lots of people whose shows I've been on that are much better at like search engine optimization and all those great buzzwords. So I come up a whole lot, but not because of Nikki's doing, just because they know what they're doing.
Yeah, and also the things, I mean, literally the entire conversation so far, I mean, it's very necessary. And I feel like people don't take any type of holistic approach to healthcare. You know, they say I have to take these pills or I have to take this chemotherapy. But, you know, especially as I get older, I'm starting to see, you know, a lot of different treatments that are coming to more of a maybe not to like the popular, you know, the wide population of people, but I think there are, at least in my circles, people that are taking NAD+, which is an anti-aging, you know, IV therapy. People that are just doing IV therapy in general is becoming a lot more popular. You know, I have some friends that use cannabis that helps with anxiety, helps with depression, and believe me, ADHD. And I'll tell you, from the long-term care space, I would much rather them use a holistic form of medicine than the medicine that they're typically prescribed, which are usually psychotropic meds and opiates, and even
antipsychotics,
yeah. Oh gosh,
antidepressants,
yes, exactly.
everything that makes them nuts. And so now you're dealing with behavior issues just related to the pharmaceutical cascade.
Right.
So it's an incredible, frustrating thing, especially when you know what's happening, but yet you're now part of the system that is hurting.
And when you get out of the long-term care, when you get out of like the home care, the community-based care, and you look at a lot institutions and facilities, the amount of medications that some of those people are on just essentially is like comatosing them and putting them, into turning them into a zombie so that they're not a burden, essentially, which is absolutely terrible. But we got to get into the show.
Yes.
And I want to start by asking you something. It's a macro question about a publication. So in 2020, publication from Harvard, health researchers found medical cannabis is increasingly viewed as one of the most effective options for managing insomnia and chronic pain among seniors, something that we've discussed. How is the perception of medical cannabis changing as the baby boomer generation ages into their senior years?
So I can really speak from that, although I'm Gen X. I'm a late Gen Xer, so I'm right on that baby boomer cusp.
Sure.
And I can tell you hands down that cannabis in the last 5 years has dramatically changed the perception. Among all adults, absolutely not. But among a greater number, because as we legalize more states for medical use, as we legalize more states for adult use, people are seeing cannabis really isn't bad. And it's really helping with, my wife doesn't want to kill me anymore. She smokes a joint and life's better. So how bad can it be? And these are things that you only really start to realize once you open your mind to alternative therapies. My mind was open not because I was like, open to it. It literally, I was about to end my life, literally.
Yeah. You didn't have a choice.
Knocked me off the ledge. So think of all the people, all the caregivers, taking care of demented loved ones, taking care of autistic children. Just if we could improve their quality of life and give them grace and give them patience with some CBD and low THC. We don't have to get high. I don't get high. I get well, Kosta. I get well because cannabis connects my dots. You'll notice me in polka dots. That's where every single trade show I go to, everything. I'm recognizable in any picture because I'm always in polka dots and a red blazer. It's hot, so the red blazer is 86 today. But cannabis connects my dots, and that's really a thing. And it helps me cognitively. It helps me with my mood. It helps me with my pain and my sleep. So I'm living proof of this. And to me, the studies, while studies are so important, and that's what the medical professionals recognize, are double-blind, placebo clinical trials. Guess what? That rat in the maze versus Nikki Lawley, who can tell you and show you exactly what cannabis did and why, who's really a more effective story? The rat in the maze or the real world evidence?
Absolutely.
And I'm not saying the rat in the maze is not important, because it is. And, understanding every person is not going to have the same effect from every single chemical constituent in the plant. But just knowing that they have options and knowing that it's not a one size fits all. I mean, it's no different than pharmaceuticals. Right. Some people do great on hydrocodone. Others do great on oxycodone, but they're different chemical constitutions. So some people are going to have a more positive response with this drug versus that drug. Same thing with cannabis.
So if you consider Alzheimer's and cognitive decline, a lot of people, they talk about like plaque in the brain, right? Yes. Now, there has yet to be an effective form of treatment. I know they say that they've developed a few things, but a lot of doctors have said, it's still too soon to tell. And I'm just curious, have you done any research on or have read about any of the trials with regards to cannabis being used to help people that have dementia or Alzheimer's?
Actually, yes.
Awesome.
In Australia, in New Zealand, these two places both have started to do dementia type studies, and
Sure.
they have found that high CBD and low THC actually does help with that plaque buildup. Again, it's very early in these trials. I'm not suggesting that they've got it all figured out, because they don't. I mean, it takes years of being exposed to these things to see what the effects are. So I'm not spreading false information, but you can literally go on PubMed and look up cannabis and dementia, cannabis and Alzheimer's, and you will find studies. I want to say there were 45 the last time I looked. And again, this is all varying states of different cannabinoids and different processes of the plant. But there were... Anyone who says there's no studies on safety and efficacy, it's all happening in Israel. It's all happening outside of the United States due to our Schedule 1 status. For those of you who don't understand Schedule 1, let me just give you a quick rundown. Schedule 1 is reserved for the drugs that are the highest abuse potential and have no medicinal value. So I just shared how cannabis has helped me. We can't do legal research in the States unless you have a very special FDA license and get your product from a very specialized FDA grower who in turn is looking more for the harms of the drug instead of looking for the benefits, because cannabis is a real threat to the pharmaceutical industry. I dare say I would rather work with the pharmaceutical industry and help infiltrate that industry and correct them on how they're trying to market cannabis instead of just the rat in the maze. Let's look at the real people and build that patient voice into their mission. And I dare say pharmaceuticals can help us. Like, pharma has the money to do this research. Right. You know, they are not the enemy. I mean, they sort of are the enemy in a lot of cases, but they definitely have not been looking at cannabis as a solution. They've been looking at it as a threat. And that's like across the board. This isn't anything that I'm sharing as new. Yeah.
But I mean, are there any risks though? Like, are when you take medical cannabis, what are the risks? And also maybe share how you can mitigate some of those risks.
Sure. So just like any other pharmaceutical substance, you're going to have risks. The good news is they don't include death. Why? Because cannabis does not suppress our breathing muscles to where like an opiate can, and literally can make you stop breathing. Cannabis doesn't have that property. So death is not one of its traditional side effects. What are some of the side effects? If you are on blood thinners, definitely don't recommend taking high doses of CBD. People with glaucoma should not use CBD. They should use THC. When we talk about CBD and THC, they're basically just individual components of the plant. But they're the ones we talk about the most because in 2018, the Farm Bill was passed. And that allowed industrial hemp to become part of this CBD craze. And let me assure you, there's a lot of industrial hemp that is not quality and should not be consumed by humans. And if you're getting it at a gas station, odds are I wouldn't do it.
Okay.
If it doesn't cost you at least $70 for a bottle, it's probably not good stuff.
Fascinating.
And it's all about quality and using the plant in its best form. And a lot of times we isolate compounds of it. So isolated CBD is different than full spectrum CBD because you'll have other constituents of the plant that now give it what's called a synergistic effect or a entourage effect. So you have all the components working together, sort of like when you have your cookie dough you're making some chocolate chip cookies from grandma. If you just have the isolated flour, it's not going to taste the same as the baked cookie.
Right.
So they isolate different components so they can replicate that in the pharma industry. And so that's why Marinol was not ever really, that's the FDA approved drug of synthetic THC.
Okay.
It never really took off because it was an individual component that didn't help enough people. And they didn't understand that stuff.
Does it help, though? That Marinol, does that synthetic THC, does it help?
It didn't help me.
Okay.
And I used it for wasting syndrome. I had a thyroid problem, and it was supposed to stimulate my appetite. I took like 60 milligrams of that, and it didn't even touch me. So I'm not saying it doesn't work for some, because I'm sure some people have had a success story with it. And I'm not here to crush on pharma or
no, not at all. No, I think I think you said it really well in the sense that pharma is going to be an advocate or an ally in this solution, and they shouldn't fight against it because, we're going to talk a little bit more about the legalization of medical marijuana in, 38 states, obviously. But I want to ask, in your opinion, obviously, cannabis still carries a pretty heavy stigma in the United States. How do you think our circumstances and how we view cannabis and its positive effects, how do you think it will change if we actually had professional dispensaries as opposed to, getting it from your friend or whoever? What if we could really go into a dispensary, say in California, and actually talk to somebody who is an expert such as yourself? How would that change things for cannabis in the United States?
So in the U.S., each state is like its own little country.
Right.
Each one has its own set of rules and regulations of what's allowed, what people are allowed to say, how they can advertise it, what is write-offable, what isn't write-offable. Because it's federally illegal, you have to pay almost double the federal taxes because you don't have the same ability to write things off. So professional dispensaries, yes. In California, there are some, and you can go in and talk to people, but it's not a medical professional. They're not versed necessarily on drug-drug interactions or on what conditions you may be struggling with. Like, for instance, if you have schizophrenia, you may be embarrassed about that. Maybe you don't feel very ashamed of that. And so you go into a bud tender and he gives you some high THC, wicked product and lose your mind. Well, that bud tender didn't know what to tell you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
He didn't know enough. They're not our doctors. Right. So I really believe for each state, they should have a medical professional or medical consultant on staff, not necessarily to be their doctor, but to at least help guide them, and know what, okay, they're taking aspirin and Plavix. Sure. Okay, we can't give them this product and this product. You know what I'm saying? So I feel that while it would help, in Canada, they're not allowed to give any medical advice. There's dispensaries on every street corner, and they're professional and they look nice. But you can walk in and you can't say, "Hey, what's gonna give me the best night's sleep?"
Right.
They'll be like, "Well, we can't give medical advice." And but yet, certain terpenes are what's going to make you tired. It's not about just the THC and the CBD percentage. It's about the whole plant. So certain terpenes are noted to make people tired. Is it a guarantee it's going to work for you and make you tired? No. It's just like Adderall. Sure. Some people get hyper on Adderall. Other people, it doesn't affect them. So again, it's your body, your system. It's going to be up to your system more than what the bud tender tells.
I want to ask this question because I'm imagining someone in their 60s or 70s listening to this podcast and feeling very intimidated about how this process works. How is medical cannabis normally consumed, and where do you get it?
So depending on your state, again, medical cannabis can be recommended by certain doctors, nurse practitioners, depending again on the state and your state's rules. In Tennessee, you unfortunately are one of two that really don't have a really good medical program. But hypothetically, I'm assuming we have listeners from all over. Getting your medical card usually can happen virtually. There's a lot of like Presto Doc, like Well. They have remote doctors on staff, and you literally just pay for the card, and then they give you the card based on, some states have for any condition, other states have for specific conditions. Like for me, for New York, chronic pain was not adapted until the end of 2018.
Oh, wow.
So I couldn't even get my medical card in New York State because I didn't have a qualifying condition. So being able to medicate and use cannabis in Canada was a big thing, but I couldn't bring the medicine home, which is ridiculous, right? When you really think about that. My condition doesn't understand state lines or country lines. So at the end of the day, I still have a headache, whether I'm in Buffalo or whether I'm in Tennessee. So that's very frustrating. And one of the things I always promote is reciprocity. Like a medical program in any state should be able, for me, being a New York State medical holder, I should be able to go to Arkansas and access medicine in their pharmacy. I should be able to go in Hawaii and access medicine in their pharmacy. It shouldn't be penalized that I can't fly with my medicine. So, because again, federal rules, but I should be able to have access to it just like I would Xanax or my antidepressants or whatever.
But I mean,
that
if
might
94% of Americans support legal access to medical cannabis, why is it still only legal in 38 states? And why is it not legal federally?
Because of all the red tape involved. You've got a lot of red and a lot of blue that doesn't want to play in the purple. They want to stay one way.
So they want
or
to keep
stay
it
the
like
other.
a wedge issue, or?
It's almost like a wedge issue. And it's very, very frustrating because the people that complain about it the most are one day going to need it the most. That senator who's been avidly against it and absolutely you're just going to, corrupt the youth and all these horrible things. His wife's going to be dying of cancer one day, and cannabis might actually be able to mitigate her symptoms and improve her quality of life. But he'll be too stubborn to even see that. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to be the voice for the voiceless, for those that are afraid, for those that don't know, that they're scared. I mean, it is scary. And for that 60 or 70-year-old person that's out there listening, it doesn't have to be scary. I encourage you to learn all you can about your state's medical program. I encourage you, there's a wonderful nonprofit organization that I support dramatically, and it's called Americans for Safe Access. Americans for Safe Access. And they are working very hard and very diligently at the federal level to try and change things. Safe banking would be such a win, okay? But we can't even pass the banking laws to make cannabis. People get their sites shut down. I'm Nikki in the Plant. I don't have anything in cannabis in my name. But yet, anytime I post an event I'm in, a podcast I'm on, if they put cannabis on that
title,
promo material, I get shadow banned. It's every time. I mean, you literally have to put like a hashtag where the A is in cannabis, the games you have to play are just crazy. Ridiculous. And I've shared, I'm not tech good with tech. And so you can just imagine the level of frustration I deal with.
Yeah.
On a regular basis.
Before we wrap up, I did want to share that actually our district in Tennessee, the local representative, he carried a medical cannabis bill in 2017. And he's a very conservative politician, but he felt the need and understood the importance of being able to give access to patients and to give access to medical cannabis. And I'll be honest, when I talked to him, I know him generally well. When I talked to him, I ask him all the time, like, why he carried the bill. And he said that, I'm going to paraphrase here. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he said that if you give access to patients that are suffering, that they'll actually be able to get treatment for their symptoms instead of accessing the black market. And I think that I truly believe that, as you're giving this call to action for people to do some research and try to learn more about what their symptoms are versus how cannabis can help. I think being able to open up access for medical professionals to be able to have conversations with people who have chronic illnesses, who may even be very close to end of life, but can find relief during that period, I think is very important. So I don't think we're as far off as maybe we think. I mean, there's 12 states, right? That's not that much left. That's more than half.
Again, the medical programs in some of these states are so ridiculous that they're not strong enough. Like they have caps on the THC of 1%. That's not going to mitigate someone's pain.
It's a good point.
Hate to
So
break it to
truly,
you,
though,
but,
in terms of programs that you find to be most effective, how many states out of 50 do you think are actually have good programs?
I would say out of those 38, let's just go with the 38. Don't give me the 50 because there's a lot. I would say probably half of them have good access and good products.
Call it 20 states. 20 out of 50.
What is
that?
20 states, maybe. Yeah. But as they go to adult use, it helps remove the stigma. Okay. So meaning you can go to a dispensary down the street and you don't need a card, you don't need anything, but you're going to get just that. You're going to get a 7-Eleven operator behind that counter that's just filling an order, give me that pack of cigarettes. They're not going to be as educated as those on the medical side. Usually, I'm not saying that you aren't going to have exceptions because you absolutely will, but knowing that you feel comfortable going there is a big thing. One of the things I like to do in the senior communities is I bring various forms of cannabis, whether it's a topical, whether it's a tincture, whether it's a pill, and just kind of go through a joint, a vaporizer, what they look like, and, how to not be so scared of it. And then when they walk into that dispensary, they are way less intimidated and they feel like, oh, okay, that makes sense. One of the things, I've thought about doing is really aligning with a dispensary chain that I can literally do this over and over again. But in cannabis, it's really silly. They don't want to pay people to educate because their sales are just coming in so hard that they don't need it. But yet, as I'm starting to do more mainstream events, they're all like, oh my God, we want you to speak and we'll pay you. I'm like, okay. I'm in.
I love it. I mean, but that's the only way that you're going to get over. That's the only way to move from what people view cannabis as, which is like the Cheech and Chong or Fast Times at Ridgemont High, I think is the name of the movie. Like to move from that stoner image, which it's okay every now and then to do that, but I'm saying to move from that image to the actual health benefits being front and center of the conversation. Like, I think you're onto something in terms of being able to have those conversations with people, with customers, and whether they're seniors or young people or middle-aged, I don't think that necessarily matters, but I think approaching it from the perspective of, how are you doing? What hurts how can I help you? Whether it's something that's physical, mental, emotional, if there's an application that doesn't involve pharmaceuticals, in my opinion, I think is a home run.
Absolutely.
We always like to end the show with a call to action. For our listeners that are interested in finding out more about medical cannabis and how it could fit into their care plan, where can they find more information to get started?
So you have to learn where your medical cannabis is housed in your state. A lot of times it's with the health and Human Services Division, health departments,
Sure.
or it could also be with the Department of Agriculture, or they might have a separate department. Like in New York State, for instance, we have the Office of Cannabis Management. And on that site, you then can learn, oh, how do I get my medical card? And Google is a great search tool, let me tell you. Just make sure you put your state in there and what you're really looking for. That's the best place to start. My website is nikkiandtheplant.org. That has a lot of different resources and different products I support. Not that I sell anything on my site, because I don't, but it's a good resource for starting out. You can also find me on any social media platform, just about, except Twitter. I refuse to learn another social media platform. But you can find me at Nikki Lawley or Nikki and the Plant.